it's different than, say, Polynesians eating a bunch of chickens and putting on weight, which may hurt them as well in modern environments. But this is a more extreme case where now all that standard social science stuff like power and leverage and asymmetries in information becomes important to the evolutionary analysis as well. Those of you who know me know that I love that stuff sometimes, even though Foucault drives me crazy too. But it isn't always. So what I want to do during this talk is spend a little bit of time up front establishing kind of an odd discussion that goes on in literature between mismatch explanations, what I'm going to call here mismatch plus, because I want it to be kind of loose on the edge and not just be negative stuff necessarily, and cultural evolutionary explanations, which are contrasted in literature. They're usually presented as competing explanations, and this bothers me. And it's bothered me for a long time, but I'm only recently trying to figure out exactly how to talk about how I'm bothered about it. Most of us, we get these emotional responses first, and then we search around and often just confabulate reasons for our reactions. But here I'm actually not trying to confabulate. I'm trying to figure out what's going on towards the goal of learning more about how these processes work. So let me get through the quick definitions now. Talk about evolutionary mismatch. I'm going to confine this to humans for now. I think it's a very general phenomenon, though. We talk about mismatch when there's some trait that evolved in one environment, and usually it's adaptive in this environment that we're positing, and then it turns out to be maladaptive in another. And this can happen for many reasons. Humans are fun examples. I just talked about binge eating. There's also shouting at the television. This is maybe not maladaptive at all, but annoys people around you at least. People do this all the time. Drug abuse. We have pleasure mechanisms that didn't evolve in the presence of, say, heroin. Heroin is like the Dorito of the drug world, right, in a sense. And cooperating with strangers, which is the topic that I may focus on a little bit more. Why would we cooperate with strangers? Well, if we evolved in small communities in the Pleistocene where we had face-to-face relationships with most people, then when we meet strangers, we might mistakenly think, since they bear the same cultural markers as us, that they're our friends. That's not completely crazy, actually, even though
Do you mean it in inclusive fitness terms?
Yes, that's what I mean.
So that's why you were not so strong about shutting television. Is that what you meant by
Yeah,
that?
exactly. It's not clear. It may just be neutral and weird, but not actually hurt anybody. It's hard to tell. Although, I mean, one of the reasons I have to remain vague about some of these claims is there's not a lot of consensus about examples once you get away from Doritos, right? People don't agree what the inclusive fitness consequences are of actions because a lot of them could be really downstream in a long-lived organism, and I think those sorts of calculations are hard to do, and we just don't. There's a lot of uncertainty about the inclusive fitness consequences in many behaviors, so it's hard to say.
If you forego a little bit of money to cooperate with a stranger, is there assumption in that sentence there are a few words that the marginal value of $1 is positive for modern humans?
Yeah, right. That having more money helps your fitness somehow, or something like that. But I think, one of the reasons I say mismatch plus here is, even if in modern environments, everybody's surviving the same amount of time, having the same number of kids, we can still talk about misfires of these things in terms of giving up money because we could use it to, do things that just bring us entertainment. But we said we just donate it to other people, which doesn't give us entertainment. So just crude welfare, the way economists think of it. And I think that's still interesting, even if, we're now postponing marriage so long and having so few kids that fitness differences are weird and inconsequential. It's still interesting to do the structural analysis of it, is what I want to say. Sometimes we have to, because people just don't agree on inclusive fitness benefits, right? For good reason, because it's part of the analysis. Anyway, so there's also neutral things. John and Lita, in their evolutionary psychology primer, talk about surfing, right? So we're bipedal organisms, and that makes surfing an interesting competition because it's about balance. Right, if you were a quadruped, balance competitions wouldn't be nearly as interesting, probably. No, I think this is a good point. It's this little throwaway thing that's sort of in the second half of their primer on evolutionary psychology, but it's a good point. We're bipedal, and lots of things arise culturally because of that. They don't call it a mismatch because it's not deleterious, but it's like mismatch plus. It's something that arises from it. Then there's cultural evolution. Two versions of this, at least. There are two broad categories. In the first, there's transmitted behavior. That adapts to genes. When I mean transmitted, I mean people have an innate psychology that attends to cues provided by the behavior of others, there's an inferential process by which that may lead to modifications of their behavior, whether it's copying of behavior or not, right? We learn from negative examples too, right? Sometimes I try to tell grad students this, they go to bad talks just because you want to see what not to do, right? Hopefully I'm not doing that today. So in version of the cultural evolution, transmitted behavior adapts to genes in some sense. So there's a genetic limitation, and I think culture as an adaptive system evolved in humans because it lets the genes do things that they can't do for themselves. What do I mean by that? I mean it can generate locally adaptive complex traditions, behaviors, and technologies that are locally adapted in time that it would take too long for the genes to do the same thing. Or there's just no way to generate the variation genetically for it. So weapons, for example, or food processing techniques. And that's our niche, right? This complex technology extractive foraging. And social organization is a kind of technology too. And we have a lot of variation, I think, as a consequence. And a lot of it's adaptive as a consequence of this cultural system. It's adapting to genes, though, and since culture and genes don't share identical interests, sometimes you get conflict between the two. And I'm a member of a group of people who thinks that often that happens. For example, in modern circumstances, there's a lot of changes in social structure. For example, we don't live near our kin so much. So we have conversations with people who really don't care about our inclusive fitness. And this does have an average effect on like how soon we get married. Right? So if you're living with your grandma and she's constantly harassing you, so when are you going to give me grandkids, right? Some of us have been through this recently. Then you will probably have it sooner just to make her shut up, right? But if you're just, going to bars in the evening with your friends in Westwood, I don't know, does anybody actually hang out in Westwood? I don't know, they didn't when I was here. But, we just avoided it. But then maybe you'd postpone it more. And that's kind of a mean effect on people's beliefs about when they should do things. And it has an effect on people's attitudes. The second version, more complicated, is kind of folding this on itself. Culture adapts to genes. If this goes on long enough, genes are then selected by the cultural environments that arise. And I think cooperativeness in human societies have a lot to do with that kind of story as well. Ethnic phenomenon, and the other social instincts that we have. So lots of examples of this. This is an aqueduct in Spain, inventions of sanitation, solving all kinds of problems. But we produce waste, right? Unfortunately, we have metabolism. Technology institutions, and again, cooperating with strangers, which what I mean by that will unfold, I think, as we go. Do you guys keep me on time? Good idea. I mean, I've made this talk a little bit open-ended in a sense, so it'll be okay. But so what I want to talk about, though, is the merger of these two. And I don't think, at least I'd like to imagine, that nobody will disagree with what I'm about to say, and yet you cannot find it in literature said this way. So I think the value of what I want to say to you guys today is not so much that it's some really new idea, but that this isn't the way we tend to talk about things. There tends to be a strong emphasis on one component or the other, and that leads to crosstalk. And also missed analytical opportunities. Here's the premise. The environment for cultural adaptation is the genes. I think we all agree with that. And the environment for genetic adaptation is culture. These facts can set off a number of diverse dynamics which lead to things like, well, Doritos. When we find ourselves invoking some kind of mismatch argument, for example, we should pause and think, well, is the environment I'm talking about here that has created the maladaptation, or the silliness, if it has no fitness consequence, is that endogenous to the preference to some extent? Is this actually a feedback that has happened over historical time by our quest to satisfy our hunger for crispy, sugary, salty things, somebody eventually stumbled upon the science required to make a Dorito. And you can't make a Dorito in the Kalahari, I promise you. You need fats and test tubes and all kinds of fancy stuff like that. So it takes a lot of science. It takes hundreds of years, at least, to invent a Dorito. So two of these major dynamics, you get culture evolving to super satisfy, and then you get Doritos, you get alcohol, which I think is an interesting one. I'm a fan of the idea that alcoholism in humans, or maybe primates more generally, starts from liking the smell of slightly boozy fruit. Right? It starts to ferment from the yeast on it. So yeast naturally ferments fruit in the forest, and then kind of smell it. There's no empirical validation of this idea yet, but I want it to be true. I don't know if it will be. But then, so we have an innate preference for that alcohol smell because it means that this fruit is ripe. Eat it now. It's not spoiled yet. And that can then lead to, we're clever, we figure out ways to do fermentation, and we can ferment basically anything, right? We're really good at this. You can make vodka out of anything that a microorganism can eat, and people do someplace. But then it leads to all kinds of problems as well. Aspirin, of course, right? People don't like pain. We find natural substances, and then we refine them, and we make painkillers. People don't abuse aspirin necessarily, but they certainly abuse opiates, which are the extreme case of that. And then art, right? So we have aesthetic taste, and for whatever reason we have them, there's no consensus. There are things like music and visual stimuli that people really find pleasurable, and you can therefore make a lot of money by figuring out how to exploit those elements of the psychology. Now, of course, that's the whole story, because the tastes aren't entirely innate, but I think the example stands. Anyway, then there's the opposing cases, which say like large-scale cooperation. Many of our social instincts for cooperating with kin, for example, can be manipulated by institutions or reconfigured with other cooperation instincts like reciprocity to make larger scale societies, which may not benefit everybody in society. They may only benefit the elites, but it's a way to make complex societies out of the whole cloth of forager brains, in a sense, which is our struggle to do. And that's, and again, I think phrased that way, everybody is okay with it, but rarely do we phrase it that way. And then there are higher order possibilities, which I'll hint at as we go, and I don't think I've understood it all, but just to hint a bit, a lot of the psychology we often think of as being innate, and myself too, I do catch myself doing this all the time, may be the product of a developmental process, where there's a developmental process that's quite innate and species typical, but there are institutions of child rearing, which are culture specific, and then they create culture specific kinds of adults. So the innate part may be buried, deep in the ontogeny of the individual, and by the time we get adults and we can demonstrate they have different ways of thinking, different mental habits, those mental habits aren't cultural in a sense, but there's still some analysis of innateness that's important at the bottom there. But it's hard to figure those things out just from comparing adults, say, right? Because development matters. All right, so there's nothing new here. In this department, you've had a number of people who have ideas like this. So Fisks, elementary forms, I think, are a classic case of this kind of idea. I don't know if Alan would agree, but I think you should. Or at least we could easily get some good ideas from this. And the elementary forms, different ways that people build social relationships. They can be embedded, they can be ranked hierarchically, but you can create a large array of different institutions, and societies do, because they have different problems to solve, at least for some members of the society. Richardson and Boyd, of course, are famous for this awful phrase, tribal social instincts. I keep trying to argue with Pete that this is the worst possible marketing phrase ever. Right? You're trying to get social scientists to pay attention to this. You don't use the word tribal ever. You don't use the word instinct ever. The word social doesn't say that. Right? Anyway, but this is what he calls it. I mean, they are not very sensitive to that idea, so I gave up trying to convince them. But really, I think it's a great idea. The basic idea is there are highly native mental habits that all humans have that evolved in the context of Pleistocene societies. And we can have healthy debates about what those mental habits are, but they're there. And complex societies are so new, societies on the scale of what we have here. Even something of UCLA by itself is incredibly complex compared to Pleistocene societies. That what these societies do to function is recruit these mental habits into particular configurations. And Pete, in particular, does a lot of historical reading to try and get ideas. He's looked at military organization, for example, the presence of hierarchy. You interact with basically one person who outranks you, and you mainly are friends with the people who have the same rank as you, so they exploit the egalitarian impulse, is what he argues. That's how modern militaries often work. Guys like to go back to the front lines because they care about their buddies who are equals with them, and they need them. They may not even believe in the national cause, if you read the diaries of lots of soldiers, but they believe in their friends need them, and they will feel bad if they abandon them. So it's like you're exploiting a more basic mental habit. He calls these workarounds. That is, that complex societies are basically in conflict. They're a mismatch with many of our mental habits, but we make them work through cultural evolution, adapting to that environmental challenge of what the genes present. Does this make some sense? And this is not new, obviously. I mean, Richardson and Boyd have been talking about this for 3 decades. And then we have niche construction, which is just everything, right? Everything's an example of niche construction, so I always put oddly SME down here. But niche construction is any case in which the environment co-evolves with the heritable material. So, it's not new, but I think this is the crosstalk theme I wanted to bring up. And I became aware of this by publishing papers and then having people write in angry responses that I thought weren't talking about my paper. Right? So it's like, oh, I didn't mean that. No, of course I think costs and benefits matter. In fact, it's on page 3. Would you please? And I'm sure, and then I thought about it hard and I thought, I'm probably doing this to them. Right? I mean, just the basic symmetry of the universe guarantees if smart people are making those kinds of mistakes in my papers, I'm probably doing it to theirs too. So this is my attempt to try and figure that out a little bit. So everyone agrees about something here. And I think, here's my hunch about what's been going on. Evolutionary psychologists tend to emphasize innate psychology. That's their interest. They think the universal aspects of cognition are a very important target of research. And so they ignore cultural dynamics when they think they can, but they don't actively disbelieve in them. At least I've never met someone who will tell me that they actively disbelieve in history. Try to put it that way. But they don't talk about it. And so, if you're a motivated reader of the evolutionary psychology paper, you're reading it like the devil reads the Bible. What is omitted, if you guys know that phrase, right? But I'm not sure exactly how the devil would read the Bible, but it means reading it antagonistically. You're trying to find things not to like in it. And in fact, for me, reading the Bible isn't easy. But then what's omitted becomes a target to say that, oh, you don't think X is important just because you left it out. I think that's probably unfair. Now, maybe sometimes it's true that leaving something out means that person thinks it's not important, but the absence of an opinion is not evidence of an opinion, so to speak. And vice versa, more on my side, I'm more of a cultural evolutionist, always have been, always will be, I think. We tend to emphasize cultural dynamics because that's what drew us into this topic. We're students of history quite often, or we like the dynamics of learned behavior, we're interested in social learning, or things like that. And we try to ignore innate psychology when we think we can get away with it. Now, the caveat here is that, of course, cultural evolution is premised on lots of discussion of innate psychology of social learning, particular patterns in the mental habits by which people socially learn, who they pay attention to, the way they combine information, and the models I and my colleagues make are of that type. But there's lots of other innate psychology that we don't talk about, and we don't tend to know about, we don't focus on those things. And so it can look like we don't think innate psychology is too important. But I think we do, at least I do. I can't speak for all my colleagues either. And so you get these are my thought bubble cartoon versions of this crosstalk that goes on. The evolutionary psychology could say that cooperation is triggered by cues. There were cues that got mapped onto cooperation in the ancestral environment, and in modern cases those cues are provided in the wrong context, and that leads to cooperation in these weird experiments and so on. Okay, and cultural evolutionists might say the cues are triggered by institutions, and successful institutions are the ones that provide those cues in contexts where it can motivate large-scale pro-social activities that help you defeat other groups, or defeat other departments, or whatever it is that's going on. And those historical processes recruit these basic cueing systems. Now, I probably wouldn't use the word cue. That's not part of the lingo of my cult. But I'm trying to cross the boundary here a little bit. So I suspect there's a lot of crosstalk going on. Does this make sense, you guys? And again, this comes up because so Joe Henrik and I and all of our usual collaborators in crime, including Clark Barrett and some other people around here, published a paper in Science several years ago. And then Dan Sperber's group wrote in a response to say that they thought we were wrong because what actually happens in these cases is institutions modify the costs and benefits. And our response was, that's exactly what we're saying. But apparently we hadn't said it right. So it's partly our fault, of course, is what I'm trying to say. But that is crosstalk. It's exactly crosstalk. When someone writes in about your paper and says, you're saying X, and you're like, no, I'm saying exactly the opposite, then we're all doing something wrong. And obviously we'd like to reach a consensus eventually about this. Okay, let me, how much more time do I have?
Well, we go till 1:30, and I mean,
And people can leave whenever they want.
Traditionally people leave about half an hour for.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we can start blending in discussion if you guys want as we go. But what I'd like to do for the rest of the talk is go through quickly a bunch of examples to do breadth rather than depth. I started out writing this talk with 2 empirical examples that I've done more reading in, but then I decided that actually every time I've tried to make a point, I figured I need to do more reading. It's like when you burrow deep into a topic, it goes down, you never know how long. You don't know where the bottom is, right? It just keeps going. So I decided I didn't know enough. to give you confident statements about things. So I'm going to give you a bunch of probably wrong statements about a large, diverse number of topics. But they're all examples of this combined mismatch and cultural evolution, and how I think that there are differences among these examples, but they all have that basic element that the cultural environment is somehow exploiting or fighting against the innate psychology, or some aspect of innate biology. It doesn't always have to be psychology, actually. What all these topics share is, you can think of it as culture has a bunch of tools. That is, there's historical processes by which institutions arise because, say, a leader gets some power and they can force other people to do things because they control resources, and then they can structure the society in a particular way in competition with other societies that can spread that particular innovation. So think about feudal systems, right, as a way of form of social control that mobilizes human labor. Those are the kinds of cultural technologies. All those things manipulate various tools that are provided by human nature, to speak casually. In the same way that a virus has to attack proteins on a cell, culture has to attack human society by what we expose, what the instincts we've got, even if they're pretty deep down and hard to agree what they are. And among those tools are things like manipulation of incentives, costs and benefits. Sometimes that can be just by providing rewards or by punishing, but it can also be by propaganda. It's actually at the bottom of the slide, propaganda about the costs and benefits. Right? People don't actually know the costs and benefits of behavior, ever. You have beliefs about costs and benefits. And even though you could say like, well, but I have a lot of experience taking an action, so I know the costs and benefits, I would say, are you sure? Because there may be downstream effects of your actions that on others, on your family, or on you down the road. So like, some of you are getting PhDs or undergraduate degrees right now, and what are the downstream costs and benefits of that? Who knows? Nobody knows. I don't know. Right? These things are really hard to do, actually. I don't mean that to sound discouraging, actually. Everybody here is going to be a winner. Right? It's those other schools that are in trouble, but you guys are doing great, right? The red brick attested that. Red brick charm. But, no, and I believe that. It's not completely a joke. I mean, this is a singular place. But, so for some of these manipulation costs and benefits you can exploit status competition to get at least men to do anything, right? So I have a 4-year-old at home, and I often want him to clean up. Imagine, 4-year-olds don't like to clean up. They like to make messes, but they don't like to clean up. So I make it a competition. I'm going to clean up with him. We're going to try to do it as fast as possible. And then suddenly he's cleaning up. Now this will probably only work for another month or two before he figures out what's going on. So there's an arms race. But I'm exploiting his innate psychology, something on the Y chromosome that makes you a jerk. And so you can get guys to do, elite guys, and lots of women too, to do a lot of pro-social things and anti-social things by exploiting status competition. And also signaling, right? So there are lots of onlookers who like to know things about people. You can get them to compete in ways that provide public information. Right? It's like a signaling hypothesis. And I think lots of successful institutions exploit those sorts of things. Some institutions close outside options. So this is a kind of thing with like the criminal underworld. And the Yakuza is famous for chopping off people's fingers or making them have tattoos. These closes out their other employment options, so they can't defect. It's not illegal to be in the Yakuza in Japan, by the way. It's perfectly legal. You can just go around and say you're in the Yakuza, which is sort of odd. But so if they've chopped off your fingers and no one will hire you now, then you're stuck with a life of crime, and then they can trust you. It's a way to create a commitment mechanism. This is at least what the Yakuza say about these things. It's an example of closing people's outside options. And you can manipulate the cues. Sometimes we do try to convince people about who their friends are, or we create social structures where they will make friends with certain people, like in the military structure. You keep people together from basic training to deployment. They know one another, they know one another's habits, and they care deeply about one another's welfare. That's something that the Germans consciously did in the design of the very successful, unfortunately, German military. Right? And we copied it in the US military as well. And then propaganda. We know propaganda is effective because people buy stuff that they don't need, for example. So with these tools, let me go through some examples quickly, and these will go quickly. Hockey helmets. We have any hockey fans here? No, man. You guys are missing out. This is the dumbest sport that I like. But it's like, yeah, let's take soccer and put it on ice and give people big sticks to hit one another with. But as many of you know, fighting in hockey is part of the sport. There are team members called goons. Their job is to get into fights with people on the other team, and sometimes incapacitate them for the rest of the game. And this is just a part of hockey. There was this famous fight in 1969 between two well-known goons, Wayne Maki and Ted Green. They got into a stick fight, and this is back before anybody in hockey actually wore helmets. Now they have to wear helmets. And at some point, Wayne Maki got in a good blow on Green's head and cracked his skull wide open. And this was broadcast live. There was blood all over the ice. People were sure he was dead. He didn't die. He's alive today after many decades of rehabilitation. He's a reasonably normal person, but of course he hasn't played again. Lots of press happened around the time, and I love this quote. This was from a Newsweek article. This is quoted in Schelling's wonderful book, Micromotives and Macro Behavior, by the way. If you haven't read that, you should read this book. It's a fantastic book. One player summed up the feelings of many. It's foolish not to wear a helmet, but I don't because the other guys don't. I know that's silly, but most of the players feel the same way. If the league made us do it, though, we'd all wear them, and nobody would mind. I love things like this, right, where there's a collective recognition, or at least some particular individuals in the community recognize that they're doing something stupid. And they can even tell you the reason. It's like, well, you know, I'm a conformist, so I'm going to die young. You know, yeah, I'm going to go on the ice, get into a stick fight with somebody, and yeah, I might die, but at least I'll look good doing it, right? I have lots of friends who don't wear bike helmets for this reason, right? It messes up their hair. Yeah.
I thought there's a substantive reason. It interferes with your peripheral vision.
Yeah, so a lot of players, this is in the same Newsweek article, if you go dig it out, you can get it online now. Lots of players testified in the same article that they felt like they would put them at a competitive disadvantage. But this is also solved by mandating everybody do it, because then everybody's at the same competitive disadvantage. And it's true, a couple of years after this, they actually instituted the helmet law, and nobody complained. Everybody was deliriously happy about it, regardless of their original reasons for not wearing a helmet. The hockey helmet thing stands in for, oh, yeah, sorry.
Sorry, on that point, there's a distinction between people think they're doing something stupid and people think they're doing something collectively stupid.
Yeah, sure.
Hockey players that I've talked to have said, if you turn down a fight, you will then be a target for the rest of your career.
Yeah.
It's not individually rational
Yeah.
to wear a helmet if nobody else is wearing a helmet. It's suicidal.
I see. So you've got to get, it actually has to get everybody to switch.
Right. Streets, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, exactly. It's got this game theoretic structure to it that I think it makes it really pernicious almost, right? Lots of these social dilemmas are like that. That's what Schelling was talking about in the chapter that it starts with this anecdote. So I think the hockey helmet, it stands in a crude way for lots of kinds of dilemmas that groups of people face. It isn't necessarily true that the participants recognize this dilemma, but there may be a cultural solution through some form of hierarchical control, through mandating it, that can solve the problem and increase everybody's welfare, at least arguably. And there's a workaround going here because we've created this new social competitive arena, you know, fighting with sticks on ice, which isn't part of the Pleistocene, probably. I mean, I don't know, but probably not. Sand skating would be more likely. But we've got a mismatch. We have a lot of still frequently adaptive mental habits, I think. Things like social and informational conformity, vanity, well, ignorance of cost isn't an adaptation necessarily, but there are things that we don't know. And then there's all of the clever, what I call imaginary play, which is a game theory term. People do imagine the costs and benefits of actions, and they're often quite good about imagining them accurately. And then they don't switch their behavior because they recognize exactly the dilemma you're talking about, that it would be suicide for them to do this thing that no one else is doing, even though the whole world would be better off if everybody could switch. But you can't control all your players. But who can? Well, people who own the teams can control those things. So in this case, we get a mismatch between these mental habits. There's a cultural adaptation of hierarchical rule sanctions, and everybody is happy. I'm trying to think of vocabulary to categorize these things. And this seems like one of these cases where there's some kind of alignment, right? That the cultural adaptation, it doesn't do anything the genes don't want to do. It actually relaxes. It sort of helps selection on these mental habits, right? So if everybody were playing hockey a lot, then there'd be selection against the conformity instinct, right? But conformity in other areas of your life, I would argue, is good for you. It helps you figure things out, helps you avoid punishment. But it's bad in this context. And this particular institutional rule relaxes that, and therefore actually increases the fitness of these mental habits. Does that make sense? Okay, let's talk about science. Science is my favorite of these things lately. I've been reading a lot of Karl Popper, which is way better than you might think, actually. Popper, like many philosophers of science, thinks of science as a big hot mess that produces wonderful things occasionally. It's inefficient because it has to tackle with the fact that scientists are assholes, to put it bluntly, myself included. Meaning, we're not idealized, objective entities. We're no more objective, Popper argued, and contemporary science studies argues, than most people. But we do agree to coerce one another by certain rules of honesty, and that can make things work. We compete publicly to be right about things. So this is a quite typical quote from Popper. You can go through Popper's extended writings and find all kinds of comments like this. It would be a mistake to think that scientists are more objective than other people. There's even some methodological justification for individual scientists to be dogmatic and biased. And he goes on to argue that's because if people gave up on their ideas when they were young and not fully developed, we'd never know the real impact those ideas could have, right? For most of us, at least speaking personally, when I first have an idea, it's a mess, and I haven't sorted out all the details for how it would work. If I gave up on it as soon as one person had an objection, well, we never learn anything, right? Now, most of my ideas might not be right anyway, but eventually I might have one that's correct. And then I hope I stick with it long enough. But this is an optimization problem. And Popper thought that the community solves this by exploiting the dogmatism of individual scientists for good ends. Now this is a complicated problem to tune, and we can have reasonable disagreements about exactly how dogmatic people should be or how we should structure communities, right? So people often say you need really small groups of scientists to agree with one another so that you can incubate these new ideas, that they can have a little like creche of kindness so they can grow up into something that seems reasonable before you expose them to the slings and arrows of the angry opponents. Now,
as you know, that's not how we do it here.
yeah, exactly. That's not the tradition we do here. But that's a common argument you'll see in the science studies literature, is that there's an excuse for having little labs in which people are nice to one another. Because it lets you develop your idea and then you can grow it out. Whereas if you had to argue with Dan as soon as you had your first idea, you know, it would be all over. Okay. Sir Carl with a headache. There are lots of examples of this. Let me again try to go through a structure here. We have some objective, we'd like to honestly vet theories. The problem is individual scientists have all these sort of typical mental habits of people in the world in their days of life. The adaptive challenge for humans is not to figure out the truth of the universe, right? I think, can we all agree on that maybe? Maybe not, but I think not. So science is a weird kind of context of labor. It can be structured in a way. The cultural adaptation is a finite number of scientific institutional forms out of the whole wide array of kinds of sciences we can imagine that channel these instincts for good, that use competitiveness and dogmatism productively to honestly evaluate and vet theories. That is, we promote debate, public debate and scholarship. And there are many other ways to do science that have existed in time, and we'll probably find better ones yet. Let's talk about eating. So I can talk about something that is more physical, because I don't think all these things are purely, or I like to say cognition doesn't stop at the brain. It's a full body experience, often a full room experience. I like this book, Francois de Callier of 1716, on the manner of negotiating with sovereigns. It's a book about how to be a diplomat, and people still read this book. You don't have to read in French, by the way. Here's the translation that I cribbed from. The ambassador should give frequent entertainments and parties to the chief personages of the court, even to the prince himself. A good table is the best and easiest way to keep himself well informed. The natural effect of good eating and drinking is the inauguration of friendships and the creation of familiarity. And when people are a trifle warmed by wine, they often disclose secrets of importance. There's a whole chapter on culinary diplomacy in this, which is now actually a scientific literature. People study culinary diplomacy. That's what you Google. And you can find journal articles about culinary diplomacy and the things that people use to manipulate one another. Or it could be honest, right? You could have a range of objectives. You want to actually resolve a conflict. Well, sit down at a table without your screaming deputies. Have a good meal. The warm feelings that are created by eating, because eating is pleasurable, at least if it's good food, right? Change your mood, and that manipulates the emotions in a productive way to help you achieve the directive. And that's basically what Culinary said. It's I mean, without the evolutionary language, but that's what's going on in these diplomatic institutions, I hypothesize. So we've got some kind of mismatch. There are lots of reasons, lots of adaptive mental habits that may get in the way of peacemaking between large symbolically marked groups, like, say, Palestinians and Israelis, and continue to do so. But there are diplomatic institutions which have evolved over time and been refined that are ways to defray these things and help all the parties get something out of these exchanges. And they don't always work, of course, because this is the real world, but they're better than letting the group shout at one another. It's also a good way to do espionage, as Culinary said, as well. Looked like you had a question. No? Oh, okay. What I want to say about this is, I find these examples kind of compelling because they're like Ulysses' sirens. You guys know the story of Ulysses and the sirens, where he realizes by the time he comes to the sirens that he won't be able to resist, so he lashes himself to the mast and he puts, what, wax in his sailor's ears? I forget. It's been a long time since I read that. So this is kind of like that, but it can be traditional. Individual diplomats don't even need to recognize what this is doing for them. They just have to be trained. Yeah, host a dinner. Make sure that everything's really good. Don't offend the host, and so on, and that'll help you get what you want. They don't even need to realize that this is exploiting and involves psychology for food sharing with kin, perhaps. One conjecture we might have about it. But just the good feelings. And so it's no accident that all human societies have this hosting traditions, but diplomats perfect it and use it strategically. But even if you're a dumb diplomat like me, you can effectively use these things just because they're traditional ways of interacting, traditional ways of negotiating. And a quick corollary to that is there's lots of whole body cognition going on. Sharing space, sharing pain with other people can be used to mobilize collective action or change people's views of one another, right? So lots of religious traditions have to do with self-inflicted agony, but in groups. So you go through all kinds, it's hazing, right? Real hazing in religious traditions. They're exploiting this evolved psychology to create bonds of a sort. And I think lots of societies have been clever in doing these sorts of things. Why should you meditate? Why should you look like everybody else you're meditating with and be in the same posture and other things like that? Because they're exploiting kind of physical heuristics that are part of our basic biology. I wanted to work Scott Atran into this. Scott is sort of the poster child for this, poster man, I should say, for the confluence of these two threads. He's equal parts evolutionary psychologist, and now he's known Joe Henry for long enough that he's become a bit of a cultural evolutionist as well, and Scott thinks that lots of religious traditions are essentially, well, partly group selected, because there is a strong role for innate cognition in constricting the kinds of religious entities people are willing to believe in. Lots of people have written about that. But some religious traditions will mobilize entities that mandate pro-social behavior from their followers, and then groups that have such traditions may outcompete others or be good at spreading at least those religious traditions. And Scott thinks this has a lot to do with the success of Christianity and Islam, the proselytizing warlike religions of the Judaic tradition. A lot's been written about that. Scott has some recent articles on that, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. I wanted to work in the Mafia here too. It's one of my favorite examples. I've been reading about the Mafia. This is one I was going to do like an extended deep thing about it, but yeah, there's a huge scholarly literature on the Mafia, and the recent literature is great because the Italian police have done all these wiretaps for decades now of these Mafia groups, and you can get access to the social network data that comes out of them, and people are writing cool papers on the actual context, like who talks to who and what are they talking about. It's a really nice literature, and that's why I decided that I would need like a year to read it all. But lots of clever workarounds appear in Mafia organizations, at least in the successful ones. This is when I talk about the Camorra clan of Naples, which has been around for about 3 centuries. Quite successful. And like a lot of mafias, it's premised on kinship. So already people like us are like, aha, evolution, yeah. And I'm right there with you on that. But unfortunately, the biological productivity of the human being is quite limited relative to, say, the bee. And we can't produce a lot of close relatives within a single lifetime. And so the size of the criminal underworld is quite limited by our basic biology. Even though we can use inclusive fitness considerations and kinship to create cooperation in these sorts of organizations, you can't grow the organization as large as you want to just on kinship alone. And so what they find in the literature on criminal underworlds is strategic use, integration of kinship and other mechanisms for creating trust. Here's an example from this great recent book on the Gomorrah clan. They're sometimes written Gomorrah, that's the local dialect. I'm supposed to be rolling those R's, those of you who know some Italian, but I'm not going to try to do it, we'll fail.
So that's not a spell corrector error?
No, it's not. That's how they write it. Yeah, it's funny. You'll see it Camorra or the Camorristi sometimes, but there's different regional ways to spell it, and I'm not sure, knowing a little bit about Italy, I'm sure people have very strong preferences about exactly how you do it, but I don't know. Well, anyway, so basically the story here is that one of these famous bosses of the Camorra clan more recently would make all of his what they call here legionnaires, the trusted deputies, simultaneously assassinate a target. That is, even if the person was already dead, they'd have to put a bullet in the body. And this stuff actually happened. It sounds like the kind of stuff of HBO, which of course it is, but HBO was basing it off of these police intercepts and confessions. And what they would say is, the boss knew exactly what he was doing. He was making them share culpability. Shared violence creates trust. Now, none of them can defect out the ideas, or there's less probability they get to defect out because they share culpability. They can't rat out their friends because they did it too. And that's part of it. So as soon as you bring someone into the gang, you make them kill somebody with other people. That was the idea. That's part of the initiation, because basically they don't trust one another, because they can't appeal to contract law, right? And they don't trust one another. And a lot of the ways they actually use kinship too are a bit counterintuitive. Kin are often used as a form of hostage taking in mafias. The idea is the reason you can trust kin in the mafia more than non-kin is because you know who their family members are. So if they defect from the mafia or rat out the police, you'll kill their family. And that's a form of punishment that you can hold over those people as opposed to the isolates who you don't know their extended family in the clan. So that kind of flips the head on the way we usually think about inclusive fitness considerations working here. It's more like the boss is exploiting the inclusive fitness interests of the deputy and knowing that he can trust him because, hey, I'm going to shoot your brother unless you do what I say, sort of idea. But lots of workarounds and integrations of reciprocity and ways of making trust, closing off options I mentioned earlier, kin hostages, lots of detailed differences in these different mafia traditions. Anyway, I'm sorry guys, this is going on. You guys are free to leave whenever you like. I won't be offended. People frequently leave my talks. So. This brings me to another thing. As I was preparing this talk, I got into this literature, and now I've got another reading list that I want to go through. How feudal society exploited these mental habits, often for the benefit of elites at different levels, certainly not for the serfs, right? But their problem is to mobilize a lot of surplus production by people who don't own stuff. That's the feudal system, and you've got these knobs on the human head that you get to move around at different levels. A lot of the peacemaking that goes on is at the elite level, and so medieval France and the rest of Europe and Japan had to invent these sort of power management traditions that could keep peace between these elites who fundamentally did not trust one another and couldn't trust one another. And of course, famously, kinship is important in these systems for both succession but also for peacemaking. And these systems evolved of kin hostage donation, right, where competing powers would donate cross-foster their children so they could trust one another. Now, this is very common in the Middle Ages, both in Europe and in Japan. You got two neighboring warlords. They don't want to go to war, at least not right now, but they can't trust one another. So what do? Well, okay, you foster my son and I'll foster your son. And therefore, if you do something bad, I'm going to kill your son. And that was the whole contract right there. Was I know you have some inclusive fitness stake and institutional succession related stake, right? Because they want the kingdom to pass to their heir. So you give your heir as a hostage to the other group. So this is a workaround. It exploits concern with kin and the existence of the succession rule, which is premised upon it, but to do something that the instinct was not evolved to do at all. Now, of course, it doesn't always work. My favorite thing I came across reading this literature, in the modern UK, they still have a hostage tradition. At the opening of Parliament every year, one member of Parliament is donated to Buckingham Palace to sit in a dungeon, no kidding, as the hostage MP. This goes back to times when the Crown and the Parliament didn't always get along, right? There was this bomb thing, and Guy Fawkes, you guys may know some of this history, right? And this still goes on. it's modeled after royal hostage taking or donation. So when the monarch would begin their carriage ride or whatever to Parliament, then that would only begin after the hostage MP had arrived at the royal seat. And they still do this, which I find really cute. I quite like it. I don't know. I mean, as a post-colonial subject, or descendants of post-colonial subjects. Of course, I'm of Irish descent, so you can imagine what I think of the British. But so, and in these systems, children often become pawns in the power game. You need heirs, but they're used in ways that have nothing to do with the interest of the kids. They have to do with the sustenance of the power of the elites as a form of peacemaking. But it's all premised upon a kinship psychology that exists far outside of this particular system. And it brings up some interesting things too. They had to develop institutions to manage. Gives you something to do with all these extra sons who may kill their brothers. Right? It's a common problem with the French, actually. You've got too many princes. What do you do with them? And so I think this is to extend the analysis a bit. It's kind of a tragedy of human reproductive biology that we can't control the sex of our offspring from the perspective of a monarch, because you'd like to have a couple of sons. I mean, one's not enough. You need at least one for the succession rule. But, you know, they might die, so you've got to have insurance. But you don't want a whole surfeit of princes, because then we know from history, they start killing one another, right? The fact that they're related to one another doesn't matter, because they're not competing with the serfs to inherit the throne. They're only competing with one another, and so effectively they're unrelated in that kind of context. Some of you who've done some game theory know how this works. It's kin selection under viscosity is what people call it. And so princes kill one another. What do you do? Well, send the younger sons off to be the hostages of other monarchs, and you can create peace and keep your oldest son alive through this principle. And there's lots of historical examples of this, because people are writing all this stuff down. It's like a soap opera. Okay, I'm almost done, I swear. Some of you will remember Jim Sedanius. He used to be here. He was way better off here than where he is right now. This is a way better thing. Jim's great. Jim has this great idea about, so let's talk about sex, race, and other taboos, right? Evolutionists tend to bring up stuff that makes people uncomfortable, and sometimes we do it with delight, right? I've left it till the end of my talk. Jim has this idea that he says, well, why is it that racial dominance and slavery institutions are so obsessed with sex, of the sexuality of the subordinate group, and why is discrimination largely targeted at subordinate men and not so much at subordinate women? What he talks about is the absence of double jeopardy, what I call the Oprah Winfrey effect, right? Oprah Winfrey is less discriminated against than a black man would be. And he thinks there's an evolutionary explanation for this that has to do with, well, sexual psychology and a psychology of control of female fertility. A recent graduate of UC Davis's anthropology department, Kristen Rauch, has elaborated on this to create an institutional cultural evolutionary scenario that goes on top of this in terms of North American racial policing and crime. And here's, I can't do the idea justice in this talk, but just very quickly, it's got, I joke with Kristen that she's got almost every element of stuff to make people upset. All she needs to do is add incest there, and this would just be like the full Monty of things to upset people. But she's not trying to upset anybody. She thinks this is the actual explanation. Here's the idea. So why are black inner city environments have such poor family structure and also all this crime? Well, because there's an institutional analysis here that also is predicated on mental habits. There's race-based policing. We can start anywhere in the chain, but let's start here. Race-based policing skews the minority-sex ratio. Why? Because it disproportionately targets men, puts them in jail, takes them out of the workforce, skews the sex ratio so that there's a shortage of men. This then taps into innate mate choice psychology. It changes parental investment strategies, right? You guys will be with me there. So you get reduced parental investment because, hey, there aren't a lot of guys. They can dictate the terms, right? This is actually, higher education is starting to be this way. It hasn't turned out to be the same effect, but the sex ratio in higher education is getting like that because I think Y chromosomes make you stupid, basically. Then we reinforce sexual stereotypes and fears in the larger society through the adaptive, in a local mating market sense, behavior of the men who are responding adaptively to the sex ratio. And this leads then to more race-biased policing, which just exacerbates. And so Kristen's slogan is, it's the sex ratio stupid. Right? When people talk about the culture of violence and all this other stuff, she says, look, the sex ratio is a big problem, and your solutions are just exacerbating the sex ratio problem. This may be the wrong idea, but I really like the structure of it, because it puts all these pieces together that I'm trying to talk about. And it's credible. Okay, now I'm really going to get to the end, and I'll hear what you guys say. I think we do need some new terminology, and unfortunately I don't have any to really propose. Some of the stuff I've come up with doesn't really appeal to me. We could just call this niche construction, but everything is niche construction, right? I mean, there's nothing you can talk about in evolution that isn't an example of niche construction, because John Odling-Schmidt set it up that way, I think. And that's fine, but environments do co-evolve with genetic architecture, even if it's just because organisms migrate into the environments that are good for them. But that means we can't, what I'm trying to call out here can't just be called niche construction. It wouldn't be descriptive enough. I came up with this cute term when I was half intoxicated called evolutionary mismatch. Kind of sounds like evolutionary mismatch, so I like that idea. But it doesn't really make sense. The more I think about it, the less sense it makes. It sort of makes sense. Those of you who took organic chemistry remember cis and trans. Depends upon which side of the molecule the different groups are on. Cis is a Latin prefix meaning same side as, so I thought this is like it's self-matching the environment in some sense. I've gotten kind of meh about this term. I don't know, it's almost too cute. But we need something, and we probably need a lot of new terms so we can talk about the different dynamics that can arise. Not everything is a Dorito, and not everything is the Mafia. Not everything is scientific norms. So slogans, all I managed to do is convince myself that we should move away from slogans, that we need a more detailed kind of vocabulary. And going through examples would give us that, and that's why all the slides that preceded this, where they came from. So now here's my final argument in the last slide to why I think we should all do both. And I mean this myself, as someone who has, whenever possible, tried to ignore the innate psychology because I was interested in the dynamics. And I could excuse that sometimes and still can by saying, look, there are lots of people who focus on psychology. I think psychology is important, but there aren't very many people who can do math. So I want to do the population level stuff. And when you guys figure out what the mental habits are that are innate, then my models can be informed by that. But right now, I can do a lot of good stuff by looking at the population dynamics. So that's what I've specialized on. But sometimes I have doubts whether I can get the right relevant dynamical scenario if I don't know the right substrates, right? It's a hard problem. So there's lots of room for self-doubt here. But my bet is that everyone gains something by thinking about the full picture, thinking that all mismatches are paired with some cultural dynamic that either exploits the psychology and rewires it or magnifies its effect, helps it get super satisfied somehow. So dual inheritance studies behavioral dynamics generated by innate learning psychology, but there's lots of other native stuff down there in our biological nature that is going to also get recruited by cultural dynamics, and we haven't given a lot of thought to those things, like the Dorito, right? On the other hand, how do we get about those things? And I think the adaptationism that evolutionary psychology has embraced is an extremely productive way to generate hypotheses. They aren't always correct, but we need something to nominate things from us because there's an effectively infinite number of mental habits you could say, well, that might exist. You know, people might innately like purple, and then culture changes our favorite colors to other things. And, right, you can come up with crazy stuff all the time. And adaptationism is, in a sense, unrivaled in its ability to come up with useful hypotheses. Now, they may be wrong, but often they're amazingly counterintuitively correct. And a lot of the psychology of culture comes through manipulation and development. And so then this is my kind of toss back to the EP side to say, things that often look innate are actually cultural institutions manipulating development of children. So that by the time we're adults, we look quite different from one another, or we seem to have some mental habit, but it could have turned out differently if, you know, the way we're raised had been different. So it's just to say, it isn't to say that there's not some important innate psychology. There absolutely is. It's just it may be several levels deep. This could be like the pea under the mattresses in The Princess and the Pea. And I think the pea is really important. I'm not saying it's not important, because of course she feels the pea, right? That's what's important about the princess in that story. The pea is incredibly important because it's important to getting the causal story right. But it could be below a lot of mattresses. And that's, I don't know how to solve that problem. But I think it's one that can be addressed by thinking detailed about ontogeny and how it integrates with the dynamics across generations. Okay, last slide, I swear. I'll put down the remote to prove it. One of the things about this is that it invites into Troy the Greeks, and the Greeks are actually the French, Foucault, Derrida, and Bourdieu. There's all this stuff that many of us, myself included, were sort of trained to cast aside, you know, discussions of power and discourse and such. But these become important to analyze the institutional dynamics. A lot of what these cultural institutions or the cultural dynamical processes do with mental habits is they benefit some members of society at the expense of others because of asymmetries in power or asymmetries in property rights or control of information, right? So propaganda. Propaganda is effective when the people generating it know a lot about the mental habits of the people they're talking to. They know exactly what to tell you to get you to do what they want you to do. We do this all the time. I do it to my son, actually, without guilt. This is stuff that the French folks have thought really hard about, and they have rich empirical examples. Now, your eyes start to bleed as you read it if you're like me. You kind of have to go through a lot of jargon, but they feel the same way reading my stuff, I'm sure. That's a challenge, but if you push through it, in particular, I think Foucault's History of Sexuality is a really good place to sort of mine for nice historical anecdotes that are ripe with hypotheses about how these particular power relations and ways people talk about things exploit innate psychology to benefit some members of society over others. Okay, and thank you for your indulgence, guys. I'd like to hear what you think. Dan is always first. Okay.
So, you know, I like the rapprochement and the, you know, both sides get their due. I want to push you a little bit because one aspect of at least much of the landscape that you depicted, I think, Terry and I were actually talking something along these lines just before your talk. One aspect that bothers me is, you might call it the that was then, this is now portrait, or the radical disjuncture between the EEAs of different psychological adaptations and the presence of complex society. Okay?
Yeah.
So while I will happily grant you that institutions like UCLA or cities like Los Angeles, you know, have existed in the blink of an eye in evolutionary terms,
Yeah, right.
I'm not so sure about at least some of the things that you care about a lot in this talk. So take a kind of a standard story about religion, right, where, okay, we have hyperactive agent detection mechanisms, we have error management strategies under conditions of ambiguity, we have, you know, we have negativity bias, and we have practices that maybe remove some of the cues of death, and you put all these things together and you start to get the mixings for religion. That is, those are the evolved psychology buttons that religious institutions can push. And then we get the community of cooperators within a religious institution, and that's pushing more, you know, the group baptismal and all the kind of stuff that you talked about, right? But then there's a possibility, and at least some people interested in the evolution of religion have suggested this, right, that there are actually individual fitness benefits to being part of one of these communities. They're highly cooperative, and their mean fitness is higher than that of their competitor communities, right? And as a consequence of that, then the institutions actually are a source of natural selective pressure favoring the propensity to believe, as it were, right? Now, you know, I think it's an empirical question, but I don't think it's an implausible scenario. And the point is, you don't have to have, you know, everything up until just a minute ago in order to have that process of feedback, right? And if that's the case, then the picture is even more complicated than the rapprochement that you suggested, because we have to ask, we can't make generalizations for each specific set of postulated adaptations and institutions and the mesh between them. We have to ask, has there been feedback, multi-directional, right, that has affected not only the shape of the institutions, but the shape of the mind as well?
Yeah, I agree with all of that, as you probably would have guessed. And that's more like my number 2 cultural evolution, where I think the cultural system has been around for long enough that a lot of the stuff that is deeply innate about humans, this is part of my professional project, right, is just like it is Rob's, is to figure out what those things are, because culture evolves, and the cultural system we all enjoy or bemoan in the present day is derived on top of the original system. It's different, right? So you can start with, there's the cultural abilities that all primates have, or many primates have, and then we have an elaborate form that is, yeah, fed back on itself many times. And much of the innate stuff that humans have is designed to give them culture from an early age. So in Michael Tomasello's work on joint attention and so on. All that makes a ton of sense, but it only makes sense in if you allow for there been this kind of feedback for a long time. Absolutely. And so I'm trying to paint the simplest story as a way of walking into this. But I enjoy much more these double feedback, triple feedback kinds of hypotheses where all this stuff, yeah, it may be that people do have an innate preference for, a coalitional psychology, some people say, that is marked by symbolic groups. And I think there's a lot to that hypothesis. I'm not sure it's correct, but I think it's a really important candidate. And how would you get that? Well, I think you can get that by a long history of being a cultural organism where local norms allow you to compete more effectively with other groups and so on. And it may actually be a deep part of human nature that is a second level kind of adjustment to a cultural environment. Absolutely. I thought maybe that would make the narrative too complicated in the talk, especially since, we don't understand those processes very well, or at least I don't. But I agree completely. Yeah. Yeah.
So, somewhat off your topic, but something you said earlier really struck me, which is that reading the Salt, Sugar, and Fat book would lead you to change your eating habits. And my immediate reaction was, I doubt it.
Yeah, maybe that's true.
So,
maybe you already know what's in there, and I just didn't.
well, so here's the question. I bet the publisher would donate the books. Get 200 UCLA freshmen, randomize them, give 100 of them the book, weigh them when they get here, and weigh them 6 months later, and you learn the answer to the question.
Yeah.
Or however many you need to get actually 100 of them to read the damn book.
Yeah.
But that does seem to be like a very simple-minded experiment with an interesting answer.
Yeah, so would somebody like to do that? I think we probably need other books, right? We need more than 2 treatments. We need there's like the no reading treatment, there's the reading salt, sugar, fat treatment, then we make them read like a Malcolm Gladwell book. Right?
That can't pass the review committee.
Yeah, probably not. It's too cruel. Yeah. But no, that's a great idea. And I think, I don't know, this isn't what I study, but when I was preparing for this talk, I did dip into the obesity literature and attempts to modify behavior, and it's very depressing how hard it is. You can tell people stuff.
So if you got a non-zero result, that's a headline finding.
Yeah, because usually people get nothing, right? That's what I was coming across, sort of depressing. Maybe that's true, I don't know. But yeah, you're right, the publisher probably would. I won't do that experiment, but I think it's a great experiment if someone can do it. Yeah.
Do you see, looking for the bliss point, like getting what you were saying, not only with food but also with alcohol, as sort of runaway processes that at a certain point were beneficial? I'm thinking about like the development of food. We start processing food. It becomes more nutritious up to a point where it eventually turns into a Dorito. But
No, that's one way to think about it.
In Mesoamerica, I'm thinking about beer with alcohol because a lot of people say not only is it high calorie, it's a good storage method. The alcohol will actually keep bacteria out of it.
Oh yeah, when I'm in the field, everything's got alcohol.
Yeah. So
Better Tabasco, I take a lot of Tabasco.
a lot of people argue beer is like a great thing for societies, but then we obviously see it being.
Agree completely, absolutely. It depends upon the context, and I'm not sure what to call it. I toyed with the idea of using the term runaway in here somewhere, but I was never quite sure. The first thing I think of is Fisherian runaway. None of these things have exactly that structure to them, where there's a correlated response, and that generates a covariance, and none of it has that, so I hesitated to use that term. But I get what you're trying to say, is that, and I'm not sure I've got enough examples populated in my head yet to figure out how to categorize these things. But definitely there are cases where some subtle change in the technology of the culture, like say we add water sanitation, and then suddenly, having every meal be chicha, chicha, right, it's this South American alcoholic soup, basically. Right, yeah, you want to eat that when you're in, the Amazon, because the water is not safe to drink. But as soon as you have sanitation, then the alcohol becomes more negative looking. Things like that could happen all the time, and so doing the analysis is tricky, and it's very historical, and this is where the Frenchmen come in, right?
Would you say that as soon as the power play comes into it, like the opportunity for exploitation, is that where it
So that's one way it could happen,
Is that where the
absolutely.
kink comes
When you get in societies like ours, where you have groups of people whose job is to sit around in rooms and try to figure out how to manipulate consumers for profit motives, yeah, then that's a motor for getting these sort of negative runaway sorts of processes, where the cultural technology or institution actively exploits the involved psychology rather than satisfying it in an adaptive way. Sure, that's one way you can do it, but I think you can get it other ways too. I'm not prepared to say that, I mean, we've got examples and I can point to them, but I can't talk about the stuff we don't have.
Yeah.
But yeah, that sounds reasonable to me that there's something like a runaway process that goes on as we're getting better and better at satisfying our tastes. So this is like pop music. I was thought about putting up a slide for pop music, right? I don't like pop music, but I've largely gotten over my adolescent hatred for it. So now I can settle down and analyze it in a way I couldn't when I was younger. Pop music is really good at pulling people's heartstrings. Man, people like cry when they listen to pop songs. It's something. There's literatures on this stuff, right? You guys know what I'm talking about. And there's something about pop music where it's like this refined, studio-made, and you sneer at it, it's like it's not real art or something like that. No, but it's really good. It's really well adapted to whatever it is about North American listening tastes. And part of that, I think, is part of an innate emotional structure. But I can't prove that, but I bet that's true. It's a fantastic technology. Now, it doesn't seem too maladaptive, but on the other hand, people waste huge amounts of time and money on pop music. But maybe that's only because they don't have any real fitness struggle to engage in. If they had to forage, they might give up on pop music right away. And in that sense, we don't want to say it's maladaptive. Anyway, am I making some sense? So I think each case, I want to get a bunch of cases and analyze them at least halfway before I start to try to pile them up in categories. I'm not sure what the universe looks like yet. Because, yeah. Question?
So I was just wondering, just going off of what you were saying with sort of adolescence as not buying into the pop music, pop culture music, and but yet buying into the sort of culture of alcohol and sort of other institutions that might follow some of these same selective pathways. And so I was just wondering whether you thought, because you had brought it up earlier, art as possibly being a little bit different. I was just wondering sort of if you could expand on that a little bit and sort why you might see this kind of adolescent rebellious tendency against popular music or possibly popular other art forms, and yet you don't see that when it comes to food, and you don't see that when it comes to drinking or other things where you see people buying into the sort of mainstream. I mean, it's, teenagers experiment with food, but everyone suddenly doesn't become whatever.
So you're asking about, like, say, explain the contrast. So adolescents kind of break themselves up into little identity groups for lots of things, like music, right? This is what I did when I was an adolescent, right? But everybody eats at Arby's or
Right, you're not
whatever.
suddenly like, I'm only eating.
Actually, nobody eats at Arby's.
Whatever.
But isn't that the age at which most people become vegetarian?
Yeah, you do get minority groups, but I think your main point holds. I think is that there is a difference. I mean, it's a difference of degree. It's not that nobody has food identity as an adolescent. It's just that most people don't. Most people. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. I don't know. I could only wildly speculate. When I'm more drunk, I'd be happy to do that. But I don't know. That's a great question, though. You've got this relative contrast. Whereas music, people find it easy to quickly really learn different tastes. So like in high school, I listened to a lot of heavy metal, and I really liked it. But it's one of those things it's got to be like, one of those things that's aversive, like coffee the first time you have it. Nobody actually innately likes heavy metal, sort of my theory. You like it because of an identity group you want to be a member of, and then you start listening to it and you learn to listen to it. This is the story I tell myself now, that I still like it. But whereas, man, everybody likes a Dorito, right? And the only reason I don't eat Doritos is because I know I like them. Does that make some sense? But that's a great question. I hadn't thought very hard about it. Yeah.
I'm wondering if there might be mathematical models of symbiosis that could be broadly applicable here, with cultural elements replacing some species and humans remaining in that biological position. I ask it because I'm not a mathematician, but I'm struggling through a paper, a recent one by Sokolov, a very simple model suggesting that in a symbiotic relationship, each species, whether they are biological or cultural, is increasing the carrying capacity with respect to the other species. And it's broad enough to handle predators, in which case the increase is a negative value. And I wonder, since you're a mathematician, or
Yeah.
you certainly do a lot of math, you might know of other models like that.
Yes, I do. I spend a lot of time reading biology papers. Probably 80% of my time is reading biology papers, actually. Occasionally I do anthropology, sort of what it looks like now. And I read that stuff, yeah, the symbiosis literature, the host parasite literature. There are a lot of models, and they're structurally different in various ways, but they all tell a story, sort of like this, that if you squint hard enough, you can think of them as human culture systems, right? So the host parasite thing is different. Symbiont systems are often like this too. One of the entities really depends upon the existence of the other. That is, you can't have culture without people, right? I guess now we have books, and so aliens could get our culture. God save them. But yeah, and there's a lot to do there. This current PhD student of mine, Ryan Baldini, and I, we've been working on some models. We're trying to develop a modeling structure where you can get all the outcomes in a cultural transmission system. You can get the parasitic outcome, where the culture evolves. You get selfish culture, basically, that evolves to exploit us. So like proselytizing religions convinces you that everybody has to hear the good news. But you can also get a symbiotic relationship going where the culture increases the carrying capacity of its host rather than reducing it. And we think the main tuning thing is, well, the pattern of transmission. How is it that people acquire? How does the symbiont get from one host to another? And how far can it move? And that, we got all that idea from the biology literature, but we're trying, once we tried to package it in the culture case, well, the transmission rules are different. I mean, symbionts usually have one path or 1.5 paths into the next generation, and there are simple lessons. For example, symbionts tend to be parasitic when they don't depend upon host reproduction for their own reproduction. They can move horizontally among hosts. So, typhoid, classic example, right? Cholera, classic example. When instead symbionts like piggyback on gametes, there are lots of arthropod symbionts that actually, their reproduction is by hanging out on the eggs of their host. Then they work really hard to help the host biology. And in arthropods, it's really nice. There's this family of bacteria called Wolbachia. Some people have heard about it. It's very famous. Lots of people on my campus at UC Davis study Wolbachia. And something like 70%, no one really knows, of all the arthropods in the world are infected with Wolbachia species. Wolbachia is a symbiont. It's sometimes parasitic. It's sometimes a mutualist. It helps its host. Sometimes it hurts it dramatically. And you can see switches within neighboring arthropod hosts in which the transmission system switches. You can see the change in virulence of the symbiont. So there's a good empirical literature there to give us an inspiration. But we're still trying to work it out. So hopefully, I'm looking forward for something. Baldini and McElreath will be coming forward with something we hope that will push aside a little bit of fog. We're trying to work on that. It's hard to make a general model. Is the problem. Yeah, no, thank you. I thank you all for your indulgence. I think